I still remember the day my daughter-in-law Danielle looked me in the eye and told me to leave. It wasn't a heated argument or a moment of anger that slipped out in the wrong way. No, it was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. She stood there, arms folded, voice soft but firm, and said, "It's time for you to go, Mom." My own son, Jason, stood beside her, nodding silently, as though he had rehearsed this too, or worse, had been waiting for the moment to act. I felt my heart shatter in a way I didn't think was possible. The house I had raised him in, the walls that had absorbed our laughter, our tears, every memory of birthdays, scraped knees and late-night talks, suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. I wasn't confused. I wasn't frail. I wasn't ready to disappear quietly like they seemed to expect. I had given Jason everything, my time, my love, every scrap of patience I had, and now they wanted to erase me as if I had been nothing more than a fleeting inconvenience. But I wasn't going to leave without understanding why. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on me. I thought back to the day I had raised Jason alone after my husband passed, standing at the kitchen sink, scrubbing floors until my knees ached, skipping meals when money ran tight, pawning my wedding ring just so he could have a proper graduation suit. Every act of love I had offered had been quiet, unseen, but I had never doubted that it mattered. I had assumed that the bond we shared, the sacrifices I had made, would earn me some measure of respect, of care, of understanding when I was older. But that assumption, it seemed, had been shattered in an instant. Danielle's eyes didn't waver, Jason's silence was deafening, and I suddenly realized I wasn't just being asked to leave the house. I was being erased from a life I had built, from the very story I had nurtured and fought to maintain. I refused to crumble. I refused to let them think they could treat me as if I were invisible. I reminded myself of who I was. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't weak. I had survived breast cancer, raised a son on my own, and kept my home running through years of struggle and sacrifice. And now, when they thought I would simply obey, I knew I had to plan my response carefully. I didn't want revenge born of anger. I wanted justice born of precision. The first step was understanding exactly what they were planning. For days, I watched quietly, observing how they moved through my home, the way Danielle rearranged small things, the way Jason avoided looking at me. They thought they were clever. They assumed my age made me slow, my quiet nature made me submissive, my fatigue made me invisible, but they underestimated the resolve that had carried me through every hardship, the sharp mind that had negotiated contracts, handled finances, and solved problems my entire life. When they first suggested I take a short rest, Jason said it in that calm, soothing voice he had perfected over the years. "Just a few days at a place where they can help you settle in," he said. Danielle smiled, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder as though to reassure me. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't bring my phone charger. I didn't even wear my good shoes. I wanted to see where this would lead, how far they would go when they thought I wasn't paying attention. They dropped me off in a facility with beige walls and plastic flowers, a place that looked designed to remind residents that their lives were no longer their own. I walked in slowly, assessing the room. No family photos, no personal touches, just a bed, a dresser, and a faint smell of antiseptic. I realized immediately that they had already made arrangements behind my back, speaking to lawyers, changing locks, and whispering to neighbors. And yet, even in that sterile room, I reminded myself that I was still in control of my mind, my actions, my rights. I asked the nurse for a phone to call my son. She looked confused. "You'll have to wait until visiting hours," she said. That's when it hit me. They thought they had trapped me. They thought the law, my age, and my silence would bend me to their will. But I wasn't trapped. I was just beginning to understand how I could act. I spent the first day quietly observing, writing facts, dates, transactions, and people I could trust in a small spiral notebook the nurse lent me. I catalogued everything like a battle plan, accounts, property deeds, documents that proved I had never signed a power of attorney or consented to this arrangement. I realized that I had everything I needed to reclaim my life. I wasn't confused, I wasn't frail, and I wasn't finished. They had assumed that my kindness and patience meant I could be manipulated. They were wrong. The next step was contacting my lawyer, Monica Reeves. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but she had never removed me from her client list. I left a brief, precise message detailing the fraud, the forged documents, and my intention to assert my rights. Monica returned my call before lunch. "Mrs. Mayfield," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "Are you safe? As safe as a woman can be when her own son locks her away and thinks she can't fight back," I replied. We planned quickly. Within days, we were ready to challenge the facility and Jason's actions. I wasn't just fighting to leave the nursing home. I was fighting for my dignity, my home, and the legacy I had built. The next time Jason arrived, expecting to see a compliant mother, he was met with Monica, briefcase in hand, and the unmistakable fire in her eyes. They were nervous, I could see it, their rehearsed lines, their calm smiles, all crumbling in the presence of someone who would not be ignored. We submitted emergency motions, included evaluations from the facility's own doctors confirming my mental competence, and froze the accounts Jason had tried to control. I walked out of the nursing home that Wednesday, a bag in hand, Monica by my side, and felt the first real breath of freedom in weeks. Freedom, I realized, never smelled so sweet. I didn't return to the house immediately. I wasn't seeking confrontation yet. I needed to plan the next steps. And while Jason and Danielle thought they had won, I knew the game had just begun. I had the law on my side, the facts on my side, and the patience I had learned from a lifetime of struggles. They had thought they could bury me. They didn't know that I was a seed, waiting for the right time to grow. And grow I would, in my own time, on my own terms. Leaving the facility didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of a long, careful journey. I knew Jason and Danielle wouldn't just accept my return quietly. They had been planning, strategizing, assuming that my age and their cunning gave them the upper hand. But they had underestimated one crucial thing. I had survived much harder battles than this. I had built a life on resilience, resourcefulness, and unwavering self-respect, and now it was time to remind them that those qualities hadn't faded with time. My first task was reclaiming my home. Not just physically, but symbolically. That house was the center of my life, the vessel of my memories, and the very place where I had raised Jason. I had to ensure that no one could take it from me, not even my own family. Monica, my lawyer, had advised that I avoid confrontation initially. "Appear calm, but stay vigilant," she said. "They will try to bait you, test your patience, see if you'll react emotionally. Don't give them that satisfaction." I nodded. I understood that this battle wasn't about yelling or proving anger. It was about strategy and patience. Over the next few days, I made quiet inquiries, checking which neighbors might have noticed unusual activity, reviewing my financial records for any signs of tampering, and cataloging every conversation I had with Jason and Danielle for evidence. Every detail mattered. I was reminded of how Jason had once been a small child, trying to hide cookies in his room to avoid sharing. Now he had become an adult, hiding his intentions, thinking I wouldn't notice. But I noticed everything. And I wasn't alone. Monica had set up communications with a network of people who could testify to my competence and character, people who had known me for decades, my former neighbors, friends from the community center, even the local librarian who had seen me manage events and budgets with remarkable skill. They were all ready to support me if needed. Meanwhile, Jason and Danielle continued their subtle psychological tactics. They would casually mention that I was older now, or that I might not remember things clearly. They assumed that planting seeds of doubt would make me hesitate, make me doubt my own capabilities. But instead, I catalogued every remark, every tone of voice, every attempt to manipulate me. I turned their words into evidence of their intention to control and isolate me. And then there was the emotional weight of the situation. It wasn't easy facing the fact that my son, the person I had poured my life into, could side with someone else against me. My mind revisited countless memories, teaching him to ride a bike, staying awake with him through high school crises, cheering for him quietly from the back row at every performance and game. Those memories were a stark contrast to the silence he now offered when I confronted him about my rights. It was a cruel juxtaposition, a reminder that people can change, or perhaps they reveal who they truly are under pressure. I decided I would not let bitterness control me. Instead, I used it as fuel to focus on my strategy. The next step was documentation. Every legal and financial record was scrutinized, every communication logged, every potential loophole explored. I realized that this situation was more than just a personal betrayal. It was a test of my ability to assert my rights in the face of familial pressure, and I would not fail. One afternoon, I received a call from Monica. She sounded unusually pleased. "We've got leverage," she said. "Jason attempted to transfer ownership of certain accounts to Danielle without your consent. We have proof. We can stop this immediately." I felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. The fact that my own son tried to take advantage of me was painful, but the proof gave me power. With careful, deliberate steps, we began reversing any unauthorized transfers, notifying banks and institutions of my authority. Each small victory restored not just my property, but my confidence. I wasn't just surviving, I was reclaiming what was mine. But I also knew this wasn't just about assets or property. It was about respect, recognition, and the acknowledgement that I had lived a life worth valuing. I decided to invite trusted friends to the house, re-establishing my presence, subtly reminding Jason and Danielle that I was an active part of the family dynamic, not someone who could be pushed aside. The first visit was tense. Danielle's smile was tight, her eyes calculating. Jason avoided meeting my gaze, but I remained composed, graciously thanking everyone for coming, guiding conversations, and even laughing at appropriate moments. My calm confidence seemed to unsettle them. They were used to seeing me quiet, compliant, perhaps even fearful. That image had been shattered, and I could see the ripple effect it caused. Each day, I strengthened my network of support. Friends, neighbors, and even some extended family members began showing quiet solidarity. Small gestures, a check-in call, a surprise visit, an offer to run errands, reminded me that I was not alone. It was a stark contrast to Jason's silence and Danielle's attempts to isolate me. The more I observed, the clearer their patterns became. Danielle relied on subtle intimidation and emotional manipulation. Jason preferred silence, assuming compliance would follow. Together they had underestimated my understanding of human behavior, my patience, and my unwavering sense of justice. I began setting subtle boundaries within my own home. Rooms that had been rearranged, letters that had been redirected, even minor changes to household schedules. Everything was documented. I maintained a calm demeanor, refusing to react emotionally. I allowed Jason and Danielle to make small attempts at control, only to quietly counteract them with evidence and careful planning. One evening, I prepared dinner for the family. Jason and Danielle acted as though nothing had happened, attempting to normalize the situation. But I had a quiet agenda. Each dish, each conversation, each toast was infused with intention. I subtly reminded them, without confrontation, that I remained an equal presence in my home, that my authority and insight were still relevant. They felt it, even if they didn't admit it. Small victories compounded, creating an undeniable shift in the household dynamic. Jason began asking questions, hesitating before decisions. Danielle's smiles were tinged with uncertainty. They realized that the quiet, observant woman they had underestimated was now fully awake and capable of defending herself. And I knew the next step would be even more critical. It wasn't just about property or presence, it was about securing my dignity and ensuring that my future interactions with them would be guided by respect and fairness. I had learned something essential. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, watches, calculates, and then moves with precision. That realization became my guiding principle in the weeks to follow. The days that followed were a careful dance of observation and calculated interaction. Every conversation with Jason and Danielle became a strategic exercise, a test of their intentions and my patience. I noticed that Danielle would subtly attempt to guilt me, mentioning how hard Jason had it, implying that my presence somehow complicated their lives. She used casual remarks, small sighs, and even well-timed pauses to provoke a reaction. But I stayed calm. I had learned long ago that reacting emotionally would only give them control. Instead, I listened, made mental notes, and smiled politely. Jason, meanwhile, remained silent most of the time, his eyes darting between us during discussions as if weighing every word. I could see he was torn, caught between loyalty to his wife and the respect he owed his mother. It was clear that Danielle's influence had shifted him, at least temporarily, but he wasn't entirely lost. I decided that my approach would not be confrontational. It would be consistent, patient, and unwavering. Each day, I found opportunities to subtly assert my presence and remind them that I had a role in their lives that could not be dismissed. One morning, I organized a small breakfast for the household, deliberately including items that I knew Jason loved from his childhood: pancakes, scrambled eggs, and freshly squeezed orange juice. Danielle raised an eyebrow at the gesture, a faint smirk appearing as if to say, "Why are you doing this?" I simply smiled and replied, "Just thought we could start the day together." The simplicity of the action disarmed them. Jason smiled quietly, a brief flash of nostalgia crossing his face. It reminded me that beneath his current silence and uncertainty, he was still the son I had nurtured, the child who once ran to me for comfort and advice. This small act was my first subtle victory of the day, a demonstration that influence and presence could be regained without anger or confrontation. As the weeks went by, I continued building quiet momentum. I began keeping a journal of interactions, not just for legal purposes but to track patterns, moods, and responses. Danielle often underestimated my attention to detail, assuming I would overlook minor slights or manipulations. But nothing escaped me. I began noticing patterns. Danielle preferred public scenes of calm, yet privately would make sharp, cutting remarks aimed at testing my patience. Jason tended to retreat into silence, avoiding confrontation but occasionally revealing his inner conflict through small, telltale signs: a hesitant glance, a pause before speaking, a sigh of frustration. I realized that patience was my greatest asset. The more I allowed them to reveal themselves through their words and actions, the more information I had to make strategic decisions. It became a subtle game of chess, each move carefully considered. I also understood that my own emotional state had to remain disciplined. I refused to internalize feelings of anger or betrayal. Instead, I reframed the situation. This was not a war against my family, but an opportunity to redefine boundaries and restore respect. Every smile, every calm response, every polite interaction reinforced my position without creating unnecessary conflict. One afternoon, I took the opportunity to speak privately with Jason. I chose a moment when Danielle was out running errands, ensuring that our conversation could be genuine, without interruptions or manipulations. I approached him with warmth and honesty, avoiding any accusatory tone. "Jason," I began softly, "I know things have changed and I know you may feel caught between us, but I need you to know that my goal is not to fight or control. I want us to have respect, understanding, and honesty in our relationship." His initial reaction was defensive, as expected. He hesitated, looking down, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, I just..." His voice trailed off, leaving an unspoken weight of confusion and guilt. I didn't push. I simply gave him space and added, "I'm here. I'll listen whenever you're ready." That moment marked the beginning of a subtle shift. Jason's body language softened over the following days. He began speaking in small increments, offering opinions and asking questions about household matters without Danielle's prompting. I saw that my calm, consistent presence was working. Influence didn't need to be forced. It could be reclaimed quietly, steadily, and with dignity. Meanwhile, Danielle began noticing that her subtle manipulations were less effective. My composure, my attention to detail, and my unwavering presence challenged her assumed authority. She attempted minor provocations, testing my reactions, but I remained composed, neutral, and observant. It was frustrating for her, evident in the slight clench of her jaw and the careful measurement of her words. Every misstep she made was quietly recorded in my mental journal, each one a testament to my regained awareness and control. I also began reconnecting with my community, attending social events and gatherings, inviting friends over for casual visits, and quietly reminding both Jason and Danielle that I remained a respected, valued member of the larger social circle. This reinforced the notion that I wasn't isolated, that my presence mattered not only within the home but beyond it. One weekend, I hosted a small afternoon tea with neighbors and friends. Danielle attended, trying to appear cordial, but I could sense her tension. She wasn't used to seeing me confident, social, and composed. Jason was quieter than usual, navigating between loyalty to his wife and a rekindled sense of respect for his mother. The subtle contrast between my ease and their tension created a dynamic shift. Each interaction, each gentle boundary set, each moment of quiet authority strengthened my position. Over time, I began reasserting small household decisions, like organizing the pantry, planning meals, and scheduling repairs, without confrontation, simply taking the lead where needed. Jason and Danielle noticed the changes, but couldn't openly challenge them without appearing petty or irrational. My patience and strategy were quietly winning the day. I also continued documenting financial and legal matters meticulously. Danielle's attempts to alter accounts or make decisions without consulting me were thwarted by proactive measures. My lawyer Monica remained an indispensable ally, providing advice and ensuring that my rights were protected. Each preventive action reinforced my authority, proving that I was not to be sidelined. More importantly, these measures gave me peace of mind. I knew that I was not only safeguarding my property and interests, but also teaching a subtle lesson about respect, accountability, and boundaries. Every interaction became a demonstration of dignity and composure, a reminder that strength could be quiet, yet unwavering. And slowly, but surely, Jason's silence began to shift into cautious communication. He would occasionally ask for advice, recount small events from his day, or seek my opinion on minor household matters. These interactions were brief but significant, signaling that the bond we once shared had not been entirely broken. It reminded me that influence and respect could be reclaimed with patience, empathy, and careful strategy. Every small victory built momentum. Danielle's tension increased as she realized that her previous tactics were less effective. Jason's tentative steps toward engagement reinforced my belief that consistent, composed presence could overcome manipulation and silence. By the end of the month, the household dynamic had shifted. I was no longer an observer, I was an active participant, quietly guiding decisions, offering input, and reinforcing boundaries. Jason was slowly returning to the son I knew, and Danielle was learning that subtle intimidation would not dictate our home. The lesson was clear: resilience, patience, and strategy could reclaim not only physical space, but emotional and relational authority as well. The journey was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. The following weeks became a delicate balance between observation and action. I began to notice subtle changes in Danielle's behavior, shifts that she probably thought were invisible. She started speaking a bit more cautiously, measuring her words when I was present. Her attempts to undermine me became less frequent and noticeably restrained. I could see the tension in her eyes, the way her jaw would tighten when she realized that her usual tactics were ineffective. Meanwhile, Jason continued to tiptoe around the unspoken rules of engagement. He wasn't fully open, but he was listening more. He asked questions, made minor suggestions, and even started to involve me in conversations about family decisions, something that hadn't happened in months. These were small victories, but they were meaningful. They showed me that the seeds I had planted through patience and strategy were beginning to grow. One evening, while the three of us were in the living room, Danielle tried her usual subtle manipulation by questioning the arrangement of the furniture. "Mum, I think we should move the couch. It feels cramped," she said, her tone implying that my judgment was flawed. I smiled politely, masking any irritation, and replied calmly, "I appreciate your suggestion, Danielle. Let's consider it carefully and see what works best for everyone." I didn't insist or argue, but my tone carried an unspoken message. I was calm, collected, and not easily swayed by minor provocations. Jason watched quietly, and I noticed a small, almost imperceptible nod. That tiny gesture spoke volumes. He was beginning to recognize that my presence wasn't a threat, that my approach was measured and fair, and that respect could be maintained without conflict. Over the next few days, I began finding ways to strengthen these subtle shifts. I started inviting Jason to join me in small projects around the house, such as organizing the garage or planning garden layouts. These activities served multiple purposes. They reminded Jason of shared memories, they reinforced my role in the household, and they allowed him to interact with me outside of Danielle's influence. Danielle, on the other hand, grew visibly frustrated. She attempted to intervene, offering her own suggestions or trying to take control of projects I was leading. I allowed her input, acknowledging it politely, but I subtly redirected the focus back to collaboration and mutual decision-making. By doing this, I maintained authority without creating confrontation. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old photo albums, I noticed Jason lingering nearby. He seemed hesitant, as if he wanted to speak but wasn't sure how. I gently prompted him. "Jason, would you like to go through these with me? I think you might enjoy remembering some of these moments." He smiled softly, a flicker of nostalgia in his eyes. We spent the next hour reminiscing about his childhood, laughing at old mistakes, and sharing stories. Danielle observed silently, her expression tight but controlled. That afternoon, I realized that influence wasn't about forcing control. It was about creating moments that naturally drew people together, reminding them of connections and bonds that were too strong to ignore. In parallel, I focused on strengthening my own emotional resilience. I practiced mindfulness, journaling, and reflecting on my goals and priorities. By maintaining inner calm, I ensured that no matter what challenges Danielle presented, I could respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. This discipline became my shield against manipulation and stress. Around this time, I also noticed that Danielle began to subtly test boundaries. She would make comments in front of friends or relatives, attempting to paint me as overbearing or intrusive. I chose not to respond immediately. Instead, I observed the reactions of others and made quiet notes. Over time, her attempts to discredit me lost potency, as my calm demeanor and consistent behavior spoke louder than any passing remark. One evening, Jason approached me quietly, away from Danielle's notice. "Mum," he said softly, "I know things have been tense. I just want you to know I appreciate everything you do." His words were simple but meaningful. They reflected a shift, a recognition that my presence, patience, and consistent respect were slowly reshaping the household dynamic. It was a reminder that influence could be regained through steady action, empathy, and integrity rather than confrontation. As the days passed, I began to integrate subtle life lessons into everyday interactions. I would share experiences from my own past, stories of patience, resilience, and strategy, always framing them as personal reflections rather than lectures. These moments provided quiet guidance, teaching Jason and even Danielle valuable insights without overt instruction. I also recognized the importance of celebrating small victories. Each time Jason sought my advice, participated in household planning, or simply expressed appreciation, I acknowledged it warmly. Reinforcing positive behavior subtly strengthened our relationship and created a pattern of mutual respect. Meanwhile, Danielle's attempts to assert dominance became increasingly obvious, though she tried to mask them with politeness. I realized that overt confrontation was unnecessary. Her tension was self-evident, and my composed responses highlighted the contrast between our approaches. By remaining steady, I turned her own tactics against her, demonstrating that patience and quiet authority could achieve far more than aggression or manipulation. In addition, I continued monitoring household dynamics with care. I noted patterns in conversation, moods, and responses, paying attention to subtle cues that indicated shifting alliances or tensions. Jason's body language often revealed inner conflict, but also moments of loyalty and affection. By tracking these patterns, I could anticipate potential challenges and address them proactively, always maintaining calm and dignity. One particularly revealing moment occurred during a small family gathering. Danielle attempted to dominate the conversation, subtly mocking some of my suggestions and presenting herself as the household authority. I responded with gentle humor, deflecting tension while maintaining my position. Jason's reactions were telling. He laughed quietly at my remark, a subtle acknowledgement of our shared understanding, while Danielle's smile faltered ever so slightly. That evening reinforced my belief that influence was regained through strategic consistency, emotional intelligence, and subtle demonstration of competence. Over time, the household atmosphere began to shift gradually. Danielle's subtle provocations lost impact. Jason's engagement increased, and my presence became normalized. By carefully balancing patience, observation, and strategic action, I was re-establishing my role, not through force, but through quiet, deliberate authority. In this phase, I also focused on long-term strategies. I reviewed legal documents, ensured financial transparency, and maintained open communication with trusted advisors. These measures weren't about creating conflict. They were about securing my position and ensuring that decisions could be made fairly, with respect for everyone involved. Every step was part of a larger plan, designed to create stability, foster respect, and rebuild trust in the family structure. By maintaining discipline, composure, and strategic awareness, I gradually transformed a tense, divided household into one where my presence was respected, Jason felt supported, and Danielle's influence was balanced. Small victories accumulated into meaningful change, demonstrating that persistence, patience, and quiet authority could reshape relationships without confrontation. The subtle shift in household dynamics became more pronounced over the next few weeks. It wasn't sudden, but it was unmistakable. Jason started initiating small conversations with me on his own, asking for advice about mundane matters like which paint color to choose for the living room or which plants would thrive in the garden. These were trivial questions on the surface, but they carried significant meaning. He was seeking my input again, reclaiming the habit of including me in his life. Danielle, however, seemed increasingly impatient. Her attempts to control the narrative became more transparent, almost desperate. I noticed her tone shifting when she spoke, her sentences punctuated with sharp edges and her eyes darting to Jason for approval. But Jason remained steady, listening, weighing, and responding with thoughtfulness rather than automatic agreement with her. This, more than anything, signaled the slow but steady reclamation of balance in our household. I realized that the key wasn't confrontation, but creating a space where Jason could naturally assert his own judgment, free from undue influence. One afternoon, I suggested a small family project, a weekend of gardening to prepare the backyard for spring. I framed it casually, saying, "It might be fun to organize the garden together. A little teamwork could really make the space come alive." Jason smiled, visibly eager to participate, while Danielle hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. During the project, I made a point to involve Jason in decision-making, asking for his opinion on plant placements, color combinations, and design ideas. Danielle tried to override choices occasionally, but I gently redirected attention back to collaboration. By consistently highlighting Jason's role in decision-making, I strengthened his confidence and subtly diminished Danielle's unilateral influence. Conversations began to deepen, moving beyond trivial matters. Jason started sharing his concerns about work stress, financial decisions, and even personal doubts he hadn't expressed in months. Each time, I listened carefully, offering guidance without imposing my own opinions. The result was twofold. Jason felt supported, and Danielle's attempts to dominate conversations became less effective. I noticed that she was increasingly searching for opportunities to regain control, but the subtle equilibrium we had established was proving resilient. One evening, after a long day, Jason and I sat down with cups of tea. He sighed, running his hands over his face, and admitted, "Mum, I didn't realize how much I missed talking to you like this. I feel lighter." That simple admission reinforced everything I had been working toward: rebuilding trust, nurturing connection, and allowing my role in his life to be reclaimed naturally. Danielle, observing silently from the other room, seemed frustrated. Her subtle glances, her half-smiles, and the occasional muttered comment revealed her inner struggle. She wanted control, but her tactics were no longer producing results. By consistently remaining calm, composed, and supportive of Jason, I had created a contrast that highlighted her method's ineffectiveness. Over time, this contrast became more pronounced. Jason began to invite me to meals, ask my opinion on household purchases, and even seek advice on parenting decisions related to the grandchildren. These interactions were small but crucial victories, signaling the restoration of a sense of family hierarchy, balanced with mutual respect. Danielle attempted to assert dominance through subtle manipulations during social gatherings. She would make comments aimed at embarrassing me in front of extended family or friends. Yet, I responded with measured politeness, neutral humor, and quiet confidence. By refusing to react impulsively or defensively, I neutralized her attempts and allowed the situation to resolve naturally. Other family members began to notice the dynamic shift. Cousins, neighbors, and even Jason's colleagues remarked on how composed I appeared, how respectful Jason was of my advice, and how Danielle seemed to struggle to assert herself. Their observations were small reinforcements, further bolstering my position in the household. At the same time, I maintained careful vigilance. I kept track of conversations, decisions, and even minor interactions, analyzing patterns for subtle signs of tension or imbalance. By staying aware without appearing controlling, I could anticipate potential conflicts and manage them before they escalated. One pivotal moment occurred during a family dinner. Danielle attempted to subtly discredit me by questioning a choice I had made about the seating arrangement. I responded calmly, smiling and suggesting, "Let's try it this way and see how it feels. We can always adjust if needed." Jason nodded in agreement, supporting the suggestion without confrontation. Danielle's attempt to undermine me fell flat, and her frustration was visible in the tightening of her shoulders and the slight tremor in her smile. These moments were critical. They demonstrated that influence could be maintained not through dominance, but through patience, calmness, and strategic reinforcement of relationships. Over the next few days, I continued to strengthen bonds quietly. I found opportunities to reminisce with Jason, sharing memories from his childhood and highlighting moments of resilience, problem-solving, and family teamwork. These conversations reminded him of the foundations of trust and affection that had always existed between us. Danielle, sensing the subtle shift, tried increasingly obvious methods to regain control, including passive-aggressive comments, selective withholding of information, and attempts to manipulate Jason emotionally. Yet each time, I responded with quiet clarity, remaining composed and patient. By modeling emotional intelligence, I demonstrated to Jason and others the power of measured responses over impulsive reactions. I also began focusing on long-term stability. I coordinated with financial advisors, reviewed household budgets, and ensured that documentation for family decisions was clear and accessible. These measures weren't confrontational, they were precautionary, designed to safeguard the household and support fair decision-making. Jason's awareness of these actions grew gradually. He observed my careful, deliberate approach and began to emulate it in his own dealings. His confidence grew, and he started asserting himself more confidently, both in discussions with Danielle and in broader household matters. One afternoon, as we were reorganizing the pantry, Jason remarked, "Mum, I didn't realize how much I've been influenced without noticing. I'm glad you're here." His words, simple yet profound, captured the essence of what had been accomplished: trust rebuilt, influence restored, and a foundation for balanced decision-making established. Danielle's frustration reached a peak, though she tried to mask it with courtesy. Her subtle attempts to dominate were increasingly ineffective because the contrast between my calm authority and her erratic behavior had become evident to everyone involved. The household, once tense and divided, was now moving toward equilibrium. I continued using small, deliberate strategies, encouraging Jason's input, maintaining calm in the face of provocation, reinforcing positive behavior, and creating moments of shared connection. Each step strengthened the household structure, emphasizing respect, collaboration, and mutual understanding. By observing patterns, anticipating reactions, and responding with measured calm, I gradually reclaimed influence without confrontation. This approach reinforced the lesson that true authority and respect are earned through patience, consistency, and emotional intelligence, rather than aggression or coercion. Over time, the household's atmosphere shifted noticeably. The air felt lighter, interactions became more positive, and subtle power dynamics normalized. Danielle's influence, once unchecked, was now balanced by Jason's growing confidence and my strategic guidance. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but it was profound, a tense, divided household evolving into one where mutual respect, thoughtful communication, and subtle leadership guided daily life. In these months of careful observation, interaction, and strategic patience, I learned that influence isn't seized in confrontation. It's cultivated through consistent, respectful action, thoughtful guidance, and quiet resilience. Each small victory, each smile from Jason, each successful collaboration, each neutralized provocation was a testament to the power of strategic patience and the enduring strength of family bonds. As the months passed, the subtle power struggle within the household became even more apparent, but the tension no longer dictated the atmosphere. Jason, once silent in the face of Danielle's demands, began articulating his thoughts more openly, carefully choosing his words, but with a firmness that signaled a shift in his internal alignment. I observed him quietly one afternoon as he addressed Danielle about planning a family gathering. She started with her usual subtle manipulations, suggesting changes to the guest list that favored her preferences and excluded certain relatives. This time, Jason listened, considered her points, and then responded with gentle but firm clarity. "I appreciate your suggestions, but I'd like to include everyone we've traditionally invited. It makes the family feel complete." The way he said it, calm, unwavering, and respectful, demonstrated not just growing confidence, but a significant internal shift. Danielle's body language betrayed her frustration. She tried to interject with quick, sharp remarks, but Jason maintained his composure, subtly signaling that he would listen but not yield without consideration. Over time, I realized that this transformation wasn't solely because of my guidance. It was a process that required Jason to recognize his own capacity for decision-making, the confidence to assert his opinions, and the courage to maintain them despite external pressures. My role was to provide a supportive environment where these qualities could flourish naturally, without direct confrontation or manipulation. One key strategy I had employed was creating opportunities for Jason to observe contrasts in behavior. Danielle's reactions were often reactive, emotional, or designed to manipulate outcomes. In contrast, my responses were measured, patient, and grounded in logic and empathy. Over time, these contrasts highlighted the effectiveness of calm, thoughtful behavior and subtly influenced Jason to adopt similar patterns. Another pivotal moment occurred when Danielle tried to delegitimize my input during a discussion about home renovations. She argued that my suggestions were outdated and impractical. Instead of reacting defensively, I calmly presented my ideas, supported by clear examples, historical context, and practical reasoning. Jason listened intently and then remarked, "Both perspectives are valid. Let's find a solution that incorporates the best of both." Danielle's attempt to dominate the conversation faltered, and for the first time, she had to negotiate rather than dictate. This was a turning point, as it demonstrated that the household dynamics were shifting, not through force, but through strategic patience and measured influence. I noticed subtle changes in Danielle's behavior as well. She became less overtly aggressive, resorting instead to quieter, more calculated maneuvers. While she attempted to regain control, her effectiveness diminished because the household now operated on principles of communication, collaboration, and mutual respect. She realized, consciously or unconsciously, that her traditional methods were no longer sufficient. Simultaneously, I continued reinforcing Jason's confidence. I invited him to participate in household decisions that had been traditionally dominated by Danielle, such as financial planning, scheduling, and interactions with extended family. Each small success reinforced his self-assurance and reduced his dependency on her approval. These actions were subtle but critical. By building his confidence incrementally, I ensured that the changes were sustainable and not reactionary. The household began functioning with greater harmony, yet the underlying tension remained a delicate balance. Danielle's occasional attempts to reassert dominance kept the situation dynamic, but they also provided opportunities for Jason to practice negotiation, assertiveness, and emotional intelligence. I realized that these challenges were not obstacles, but essential components in strengthening the family's structure and relationships. One particularly revealing episode involved a discussion about a family vacation. Danielle had strong opinions about destinations, accommodations, and scheduling, while Jason had his own preferences. Initially, Danielle tried to impose her choices, framing them as universally beneficial. I suggested a collaborative approach, a list of options, evaluation criteria, and a vote among family members. Jason embraced this method enthusiastically. Danielle reluctantly agreed, but her attempts to manipulate the criteria or sway the vote were met with calm, consistent resistance from both Jason and me. The final decision reflected a balanced compromise, demonstrating the effectiveness of structured negotiation over unilateral control. This event had a lasting impact on Danielle. While she didn't openly concede, she began recognizing that collaboration yielded better outcomes than manipulation. I continued to emphasize small, strategic actions, listening more than speaking, reinforcing positive behavior, modeling composure under pressure, and creating consistent routines that promoted stability. Over time, these actions cultivated an environment where influence was earned through trust, consistency, and emotional intelligence rather than dominance or coercion. I also maintained careful observation of nonverbal cues. Danielle's subtle signals, hesitant glances, fleeting expressions of frustration, or the slight tension in her voice, offered insight into her evolving mindset. By understanding these nuances, I could anticipate potential conflicts and manage them before escalation, ensuring that the household remained balanced. Meanwhile, Jason's confidence and assertiveness continued to grow. He started taking the initiative in family matters, coordinating schedules, planning meals, and mediating minor disagreements between Danielle and other household members. His increasing participation signaled that the strategies we had implemented were effective. Importantly, the household's overall atmosphere began improving. Conversations became more collaborative, meals more relaxed, and interactions among family members more genuine. Danielle, despite her initial resistance, had to adjust to this new dynamic, fostering a gradual but undeniable shift in household power distribution. One evening, after a long day of family activities, Jason pulled me aside quietly. "Mom," he said, "I feel like we're finally getting the balance right. I see now how important it is to listen, but also to speak up. Thank you for guiding me through this." His words carried a weight that reflected deep appreciation, recognition, and personal growth. Danielle overheard the exchange, but didn't react. Her silence was telling. She realized, consciously or not, that the household dynamic was no longer under her unilateral control. Over the following weeks, I continued reinforcing this equilibrium. I facilitated open discussions, encouraged fair decision-making, and ensured that Jason had space to assert himself independently. The household operated with a new rhythm, one that prioritized respect, collaboration, and thoughtful communication. While occasional tensions arose, They were manageable and provided opportunities for continued growth rather than conflict. In reflection, the journey had been challenging yet enlightening. I learned that influence is not imposed through confrontation or aggression, but cultivated through patience, empathy, strategic guidance, and the careful modeling of behavior. Jason's transformation from silent observer to active participant demonstrated the power of consistent, measured influence. Danielle's eventual adaptation, although subtle and reluctant, confirmed the effectiveness of this approach. The household, once dominated by tension and imbalance, evolved into a more harmonious environment, where authority, respect, and communication coexisted. This transformation underscored a critical truth. Sustainable change in family dynamics is achieved not through force, but through consistent, patient, and thoughtful action, coupled with the cultivation of trust, confidence, and mutual understanding. Every small decision, every gentle intervention, and every moment of patience contributed to the restoration of balance. And in that restored balance, the family found a sense of unity and stability that had seemed elusive for months. As the household settled into this new rhythm, I realized that the most delicate challenge was maintaining consistency. While Jason had grown confident and Danielle had learned to adjust her approach, old patterns had a way of resurfacing if unchecked. It became clear that subtle reminders of fairness, empathy, and collaboration were necessary to prevent regression. One morning, Danielle attempted to assert her preferences regarding the children's weekend activities. She proposed a schedule that heavily favored her own conveniences, expecting Jason to comply silently as he had in the past. Instead, he calmly reviewed the schedule, noting conflicts with prior commitments, and proposed a revised plan that accommodated everyone. I watched silently as Danielle's reaction shifted from mild irritation to reluctant acknowledgement. Jason didn't argue aggressively, he simply presented facts, alternatives, and logical reasoning. This approach neutralized potential confrontation while reinforcing a balanced dynamic. I reflected on how essential these small, consistent interventions were. Change doesn't occur in dramatic shifts alone. It is the accumulation of everyday choices, the subtle modeling of behavior, and the reinforcement of principles like fairness and respect that truly alter dynamics. Danielle's attempts to dominate had diminished, not because she had been forced, but because the household no longer rewarded unilateral control. Over time, she began adjusting her strategies, opting for negotiation rather than confrontation. Jason, too, had internalized the lessons of observation and consistency. I noticed that he now anticipated potential conflicts before they arose, calmly addressed them, and even guided Danielle toward compromise when necessary. This foresight was a critical development. It reflected his growing ability to manage household dynamics independently, without relying on my constant mediation. One afternoon, a minor disagreement arose over a dinner menu. Danielle wanted to prepare a dish that she claimed everyone loved, but Jason pointed out that some family members had dietary restrictions that had been overlooked. Instead of escalating, Danielle attempted to dismiss the concern, but Jason proposed a simple compromise: include her dish while also offering alternatives for those with restrictions. The discussion ended smoothly, with everyone satisfied. Observing this, I realized that conflict, when managed constructively, could actually reinforce collaboration rather than undermine it. I began intentionally creating scenarios where Danielle and Jason would have to negotiate solutions together, ensuring that both had equal opportunities to exercise their influence. Over time, this practice strengthened their ability to communicate effectively, resolve disputes, and respect one another's perspectives. I also recognized that empathy was a powerful tool. By modeling empathetic responses, acknowledging Danielle's frustrations without validating manipulative behavior, and encouraging Jason to do the same, I nurtured an environment where understanding became the default reaction rather than defensiveness or control. One pivotal moment occurred during a discussion about financial priorities. Danielle had strong opinions about allocating money to certain projects, while Jason had other practical concerns. Instead of engaging in a heated argument, I suggested a structured approach: list priorities, assign resources proportionally, and review outcomes collectively. Danielle initially resisted, arguing that her experience gave her authority. Jason calmly reminded her that the goal was to find a solution that benefited the family as a whole. With guidance, Danielle reluctantly followed the process, and the outcome was more balanced than either had anticipated. The success reinforced Jason's confidence and demonstrated to Danielle that collaborative decision-making could be both effective and satisfying. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle shifts in Danielle's attitude. She began asking Jason for his opinions more frequently, no longer expecting blind compliance. While her tone still carried traces of her initial assertiveness, it was tempered with curiosity and a willingness to listen. This evolution, though gradual, reflected the effectiveness of persistent, patient guidance. Simultaneously, I continued to reinforce boundaries, gently but firmly. Whenever Danielle attempted to manipulate situations, I remained composed, calmly redirecting conversations and highlighting fairness. Over time, these consistent responses made her manipulations less effective, as they no longer achieved the desired outcome. Jason's role in this dynamic was crucial. Each time he asserted himself respectfully, it reinforced the household's new equilibrium. His consistent demonstration of calm, logical reasoning and empathy created a feedback loop. Danielle adjusted her strategies, I maintained support and guidance, and Jason grew stronger in confidence and skill. One day, Jason suggested a weekend family activity that had previously been a source of conflict. Danielle initially protested, claiming it conflicted with her preferences. Jason calmly proposed modifications to accommodate her needs, and together they arrived at a solution that satisfied both parties. Observing this, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The household had evolved from a power struggle into a cooperative, balanced environment. Another significant development was the children's response to these changes. They began noticing that conflicts were handled more respectfully, that everyone's voice mattered, and that decisions were made thoughtfully rather than impulsively. The family's overall morale improved, as did the quality of interactions between all members. In many ways, this shift was more profound than the resolution of direct conflicts between Danielle and Jason. The children's perception of fairness, respect, and collaboration had been positively influenced, creating a long-term foundation for healthy family dynamics. I also reflected on the subtle internal shifts within Danielle. Though she remained strong-willed and occasionally assertive, she began to value Jason's input more than ever before. Her respect, initially grudging and quiet, grew through repeated experiences where collaboration led to better outcomes than unilateral control. While Danielle would never openly admit this, her actions reflected acknowledgement and adaptation. Meanwhile, Jason's growth continued beyond household management. He developed a greater understanding of negotiation, compromise, and emotional intelligence, skills that would serve him in broader life contexts. I recognized that the household had become not just a space of coexistence, but a living laboratory for personal development. The patterns established here would extend into professional, social, and familial arenas, creating lasting impacts far beyond the immediate environment. Importantly, I understood that patience, observation, and gentle influence had been far more effective than confrontation or criticism. Every small reinforcement, every calm intervention, and every opportunity for collaboration accumulated into a powerful foundation for sustained change. The subtle power dynamics had shifted, but not through force or conflict. Rather, they had evolved through consistency, empathy, and strategic guidance. By focusing on these principles, I ensured that the household remained balanced, harmonious, and resilient to future challenges. One evening, I overheard a quiet conversation between Jason and Danielle in the living room. He thanked her for considering his suggestions, while she acknowledged, in her own reserved way, that his approach had merit. Listening to them, I realized that the household had reached a new level of equilibrium. The power struggle that once defined daily life had transformed into mutual recognition, respect, and shared responsibility. While tensions would occasionally arise, they no longer threatened to destabilize the family. Instead, they became opportunities for continued growth, dialogue, and understanding. Reflecting on these months of change, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The household had evolved from a state of tension and imbalance into one of collaboration, empathy, and strategic harmony. The process had been gradual, requiring patience, observation, and subtle guidance, but the results were tangible. Jason's confidence and assertiveness had flourished, Danielle's adaptability had increased, and the family as a whole had found a new sense of unity. I understood that these changes would continue to develop over time, but the foundation had been firmly established. As the weeks went by, I noticed a more profound transformation than I had initially anticipated. The subtle shifts in behavior that Jason and Danielle exhibited were now becoming ingrained patterns. Morning routines, which had once been arenas for minor disputes and passive resistance, now ran smoothly, with each person anticipating the needs of the other. Jason took the initiative to prepare breakfast when Danielle was busy with work, and Danielle, in turn, acknowledged his efforts and offered small gestures of appreciation. These gestures were not grand, but their significance lay in consistency. The family atmosphere had shifted from tension and quiet resentment to one of mutual consideration, where even small acts of acknowledgement reinforced positive behavior. One afternoon, I observed Danielle and Jason planning a weekend trip. Previously, such planning would have sparked arguments over destinations, timings, and expenditures. This time, however, the discussion was markedly different. Danielle expressed her preferences clearly, while Jason proposed alternatives with reasoning and practical insights. Rather than escalating into conflict, the conversation became a genuine negotiation. Danielle listened attentively, adjusted her expectations, and offered compromises, while Jason maintained his calm, measured approach. By the time the plan was finalized, both parties felt satisfied and respected. Witnessing this, I felt a quiet sense of relief and validation. The transformation was no longer limited to isolated incidents. It was becoming a pattern that defined daily interactions. I realized that the foundation of mutual respect and strategic guidance I had been reinforcing was finally taking hold. Yet, I also understood that complacency could undo progress. Maintaining this equilibrium required vigilance. Subtle tensions could resurface if either party reverted to old habits or if new stressors entered the household dynamic. Therefore, I continued to observe and subtly guide interactions, reinforcing positive behaviors while discouraging manipulative tendencies. One evening, an unexpected challenge emerged. Danielle received news that her work schedule would change, requiring her to be away for several days. Historically, such changes would have triggered complaints, frustration, and a test of Jason's patience. This time, however, Jason approached the situation with pragmatism. He offered support, helped organize the household logistics, and even suggested ways Danielle could manage her responsibilities remotely. Danielle, noticing his proactive approach and empathy, responded with gratitude rather than irritation. She adjusted her plans accordingly, and the household continued to function smoothly despite the disruption. This incident illustrated how deeply the dynamics had shifted. Jason's calm, thoughtful approach now guided not only everyday routines, but also responses to unforeseen challenges. Danielle's reactions had also evolved. She no longer assumed control through assertiveness alone, but instead engaged in problem-solving collaboratively. Another subtle yet significant change was in the way both Jason and Danielle addressed the children. Previously, disagreements often unfolded in front of them, creating an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. Now, conflicts were managed privately or handled with a tone of collaboration that modeled constructive behavior. The children began mimicking these patterns, learning negotiation, empathy, and patience. I noticed them resolving minor disputes among themselves with phrases like, "Let's find a solution together," or "Can we compromise?" These moments brought me a sense of profound satisfaction, as the ripple effect of improved communication and respect extended beyond the adults to the younger generation. One Saturday morning, I observed Danielle preparing breakfast while Jason assisted the children with schoolwork. Danielle paused, seemingly frustrated, when a task took longer than expected. Jason gently reminded her to breathe, offered to take over the task temporarily, and suggested a small adjustment to the schedule. Danielle followed his guidance, and the morning proceeded without incident. The children watched silently, absorbing the dynamic of calm problem-solving and mutual respect. Moments like these, though seemingly ordinary, were the bedrock of sustainable change. Over time, the household had transitioned from a space of reactive tension to one of proactive collaboration. This shift had not occurred overnight. It was the product of countless small interventions, consistent modeling of behavior, and reinforcement of principles like fairness, empathy, and reasoned negotiation. Observing these developments, I reflected on the subtle strategies that had enabled them. First, consistent reinforcement of positive behavior was crucial. Each time Jason acted with calm assertiveness or Danielle engaged in compromise, these actions were acknowledged, creating a feedback loop that encouraged repetition. Second, the strategic use of observation and gentle guidance helped prevent conflicts from escalating. By monitoring interactions and intervening subtly when necessary, I ensured that both adults learned from real-world scenarios rather than abstract instructions. Third, modeling empathy and respect created a standard for behavior that was difficult to ignore. By demonstrating these traits consistently, the household internalized them as default responses. One afternoon, Danielle suggested an impromptu family outing, proposing an activity that had previously sparked arguments over logistics and preferences. Jason calmly assessed the feasibility, suggested minor adjustments, and the family agreed on a plan that accommodated everyone. The outing proceeded smoothly, with laughter, cooperation, and genuine enjoyment. Observing this, I realized that the household had reached a level of maturity that extended beyond conflict resolution. It was now capable of proactive planning, shared responsibility, and mutual respect. Despite these positive developments, I remained aware of potential vulnerabilities. Stressful events, external pressures, or lapses in communication could still test the equilibrium. Therefore, I continued to encourage open dialogue, problem-solving, and acknowledgement of emotions. By creating a culture where challenges were addressed collaboratively, the household became resilient to setbacks. One evening, Jason approached Danielle with a suggestion for a home improvement project. Danielle initially resisted, preferring her original plan. Jason calmly presented his reasoning, highlighting practical considerations and long-term benefits. Danielle listened, asked clarifying questions, and ultimately agreed to a compromise that incorporated elements of both proposals. This incident reflected a deeper shift. Negotiation and collaboration had become embedded in the decision-making process rather than being reactive measures imposed during conflict. Another significant change was Danielle's growing recognition of Jason's autonomy and judgment. Previously, she had assumed that asserting control was necessary to ensure outcomes aligned with her expectations. Now, she sought his input, acknowledged his contributions, and respected his perspective. While her assertiveness remained, it was tempered by a genuine willingness to collaborate, reflecting a transformation from unilateral control to shared responsibility. The children, observing these interactions, internalized lessons about negotiation, patience, and empathy. They began approaching conflicts with reasoning and dialogue rather than demands or resistance. The household atmosphere had evolved from tension and power struggles to one of mutual respect, cooperation, and proactive problem-solving. In reflecting on these months of change, I recognized that the process had been gradual, nuanced, and dependent on consistent, strategic guidance. Each small intervention, acknowledgement, and modeling of behavior contributed to a cumulative effect that reshaped the family dynamic. The lessons learned extended beyond immediate conflicts. They had become tools for lifelong interpersonal skills, applicable in broader social, professional, and familial contexts. I realized that the most profound transformation was not simply the reduction of conflict, but the cultivation of resilience, empathy, and collaboration within the family. These qualities had become embedded in daily interactions, creating a foundation for sustained harmony and growth. As the days turned into months, the household settled into a rhythm that felt almost effortless. The transformation that once seemed uncertain had now become the natural state of their daily lives. Jason's silence during previous conflicts was no longer a sign of weakness or avoidance, but a marker of thoughtfulness and measured patience. Danielle's previous insistence on control had softened into a collaborative spirit, and the children thrived under the model of empathy, respect, and problem-solving that their parents now exemplified. One evening, as I observed them gathered in the living room, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and relief. The tension that had once defined the household was replaced by laughter, conversation, and shared purpose. They were no longer a family navigating constant friction. They were a unit capable of handling challenges with grace and understanding. It struck me how subtle yet consistent interventions had fostered this profound change. Each act of guidance, acknowledgement, and modeling of behavior had compounded over time, producing lasting results. The household had not merely avoided conflict, it had learned to thrive through collaboration, understanding, and mutual respect. Jason and Danielle now made decisions together, resolving disagreements through dialogue rather than silence or force. The children watched and absorbed these lessons, applying them in their own interactions and carrying forward a legacy of empathy and cooperation. The journey had not been easy, but the outcome demonstrated the transformative power of patience, strategic guidance, and unwavering commitment to cultivating positive dynamics. In witnessing their evolution, I realized that the true measure of change was not the absence of conflict, but the ability to navigate it with grace, understanding, and mutual support.